At this age, honesty is all that's left. I am 87 years old, and at this stage of my life, I no longer feel the need to explain who I am or justify the choices I made along the way. Age has quietly taken many things from me: speed, strength, certainty, but in return, it has given me something far more valuable: clarity. When you reach this age, you stop performing for the world and start speaking only what feels true. I have lived long enough to see how often people pretend to be confident, pretend to have everything under control, pretend that they understand life better than they do. I used to do the same. I wore responsibility like armor and busyness like a badge of honor, believing that looking strong was more important than being honest. But time has a way of stripping away what doesn't matter. Slowly, year by year, the need to impress disappears. You stop caring about winning arguments, collecting approval, or appearing successful in someone else's eyes. What remains is a quiet voice inside you that asks for truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. At 87, honesty is no longer a choice, it is the only option left. You no longer have the luxury of lying to yourself. You see your life as it truly was, not as you once narrated it. The victories and mistakes sit side by side, equally undeniable, equally real. And this honesty does not arrive dramatically. There is no sudden revelation, no loud moment of realization. It arrives quietly, often in silence, when the house is empty and the noise of the world has faded. In those moments, you finally hear yourself clearly. This is where my story truly begins, not with success, failure, or achievement, but with the moment I stopped pretending and allowed myself to see my life without excuses. Because when honesty becomes all that's left, it also becomes the beginning of wisdom. I spent most of my life chasing later. For most of my life, I believed I was being responsible. I woke up early, worked long hours, and told myself that discipline and sacrifice were the price of a meaningful future. I wasn't reckless, and I wasn't lazy. I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do, even when it meant postponing the things that made life feel human. I kept promising myself that there would be time later. Time to rest, time to laugh, time to be present. Later became a comfortable excuse, a soft word that allowed me to delay joy without feeling irresponsible. I didn't realize that later was slowly turning into a habit. Work filled my days, and plans filled my head. I convinced myself that staying busy meant I was moving forward, that productivity was proof of progress. But often, busyness was just a way to avoid asking harder questions about whether I was living the life I actually wanted. I missed small moments without noticing. Conversations shortened, visits postponed, quiet evenings replaced by obligations. None of it felt like loss at the time, because each decision seemed reasonable on its own. It was only years later that I realized those moments never came back. The future I was building always seemed just one step away. One more project, one more year, one more milestone. I believed that once I reached it, life would finally slow down and reward my patience. But life doesn't work like that. It keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. Looking back now, I see that I didn't lose time all at once. I gave it away gradually, one later at a time. And that realization is heavier than any single regret, because it shows how quietly a life can slip past you while you're busy planning it. I thought I had more time than I did. For a long time, I lived with the quiet assumption that time was on my side. Not consciously, not arrogantly, but comfortably. I believed there would always be another chance to fix things, another year to slow down, another version of myself that would finally have everything figured out. I treated time as something expandable, something flexible. Days felt ordinary, weeks blended together, and years passed without leaving sharp edges. Because nothing dramatic was happening, I assumed nothing important was being lost. I postponed difficult conversations because they felt uncomfortable. I delayed meaningful changes because they felt inconvenient. I told myself I would deal with it all later, when life was calmer, when I was wiser, when the timing felt right. What I didn't understand then is that time doesn't announce itself when it's running out. It doesn't warn you before moments disappear. It simply moves forward, quietly, steadily, indifferent to your plans and intentions. The people I loved grew older alongside me, though I barely noticed. Relationships changed shape. Some faded. Some ended without proper goodbyes. At the time, I assumed there would always be another opportunity to reconnect. It was only later, much later, that I realized time had been asking for my attention all along. Not loudly, not urgently, but patiently. And by the time I truly listened, many of the moments I thought were waiting for me were already gone. Thinking you have more time than you do is not a mistake made in one moment. It's a belief you live inside for years. And when that belief finally cracks, you understand how fragile someday really is. The question that quietly changed everything. It didn't happen during a crisis, or a moment of great loss. There was no hospital room, no warning, no dramatic turning point. It happened on an ordinary day, in an ordinary moment, when nothing seemed important enough to change the course of a life. I was not searching for answers. I was not reflecting deeply. My mind simply slowed down enough for a single thought to surface, uninvited and unannounced, as if it had been waiting patiently for years. The question itself was simple. No philosophy. No complexity. Just a quiet sentence that settled into my chest and refused to leave. If my life were to end sooner than I expect, what would I regret the most? At first, I dismissed it. I told myself it was pointless, even morbid. But the question returned, again and again, not aggressively, but persistently, like a soft knock you can't unhear once you've noticed it. What made the question powerful was not fear, but clarity. It cut through the noise of daily life, through excuses and rationalizations, and asked me to look at my life without defending it. I realized that this was not a question about death. It was a question about life. About how I had been living, what I had been prioritizing, and what I had been quietly sacrificing without noticing. That single question didn't demand immediate answers. It simply stayed with me, reshaping how I saw my past and forcing me to reconsider how I might spend whatever time remained. Some questions don't arrive to be solved. They arrive to be lived with. And once this one entered my life, nothing looked quite the same again. The answer wasn't what I expected. When I first asked myself the question, I assumed the answer would be obvious. I expected regret to look like something measurable, money not earned, goals not reached, success that slipped through my hands. Those were the things I had been trained to worry about my entire life. But when I searched honestly, none of those things felt heavy enough. They mattered once, yes, but they no longer carried weight. Instead, my mind kept returning to moments so small I had barely noticed them when they passed. What I regretted most were the hours I chose work over people, the evenings I stayed busy instead of present, and the conversations I postponed because I assumed there would always be another opportunity to have them. I thought regret would be loud, dramatic, and obvious. Instead, it was quiet. It sounded like unanswered phone calls, birthdays I missed, and moments of connection I traded for productivity without realizing the cost. There were also risks I never took, not because they were impossible, but because they felt uncomfortable. I chose certainty over curiosity, safety over honesty, and routine over truth, telling myself it was the mature thing to do. The most painful realization was this: the things I regret are not the things I failed at, but the things I never allowed myself to try. Failure would have at least meant I showed up. That was the moment the question stopped being theoretical. It became personal. It forced me to confront the gap between the life I lived and the life I quietly wanted, but never gave myself permission to choose. The answer wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. And honesty, once you accept it, leaves very little room to keep living the same way. We overestimate time and underestimate life. I've come to realize that one of the most common mistakes we make is believing we have more time than we do. Not because we're careless, but because time feels invisible when nothing urgent is taken away from us. Days pass quietly, and we mistake that quietness for abundance. We plan our lives as if time is guaranteed. We delay joy, postpone connection, and reschedule meaning, believing we can always come back to what matters later, once everything else is handled. At the same time, we underestimate life itself. We overlook the weight of ordinary moments, the quiet mornings, shared meals, brief conversations, because they don't look important while they're happening. Only later do we realize they were the substance of life all along. Life does not announce its significance. It doesn't label moments as meaningful while you're inside them. Meaning often reveals itself only in hindsight, when the moment has already passed. We assume that urgency will arrive when it's needed, that something will signal when it's time to pay attention. But life rarely does that. It simply continues, offering moments quietly, without insisting we notice them. Looking back, I see how often I rushed through moments I would later miss. Not because they were unimportant, but because I didn't know their value at the time. I was too focused on what came next. When you overestimate time, you treat life casually. When you understand its limits, every moment gains weight. Not pressure, but presence. This realization doesn't demand that you live faster or louder. It asks you to live more attentively. To notice what's already there, before time quietly carries it away. Presence matters more than longevity. As I grow older, I've learned that living longer does not automatically mean living better. Time alone does not create meaning. It simply creates space, and what truly matters is how we choose to occupy it. I've known people who lived long lives but were rarely present in them. Their days were full, yet somehow empty. They were always thinking about what came next, even while life was happening right in front of them. Presence is not about doing more. It's about noticing more. It's the difference between being in a moment and merely passing through it. A short life lived with attention often feels fuller than a long life lived on autopilot. For many years, I believed meaning would come later, once I had more time, more stability, more control. But meaning does not wait. It appears quietly in moments when you slow down enough to let it in. I now understand that presence is an act of respect, toward your time, toward others, and toward yourself. When you are present, even ordinary moments carry weight and depth. Life is not asking us to extend it endlessly. It's asking us to show up while we're here. To listen fully, to see clearly, and to feel without rushing past what we feel. The days I remember most are not the longest ones, but the ones where I was fully there. Where time seemed to slow, not because life was perfect, but because my attention was undivided. In the end, presence does not make life longer. It makes it deeper. And depth, I've learned, is what stays with you when time moves on. Ask yourself this while you still can. If you're listening to this right now, this part is for you. Not the future version of you, not the calmer version, not the one who has everything figured out. You, as you are, in this moment. You don't need to be old to ask the question that changed everything for me. You only need to be honest enough to sit with it. Because the earlier you ask it, the more power it has to guide your life instead of simply explaining it after the fact. Ask yourself, quietly, without rushing to answer, if your life were to end sooner than you expect, what would you regret the most? Don't answer with what sounds impressive. Answer with what feels heavy. You may notice that the answer doesn't come from ambition. It comes from relationships, from moments of honesty, from chances you didn't take because waiting felt safer than risking discomfort. This question is not meant to scare you. It's meant to focus you. It strips away noise and points gently toward what you already know matters, but often ignore because life feels busy and urgent. You don't need to change everything overnight. You only need to notice where your attention is going, and where it should be going instead. Small shifts, made early, change entire lives. Ask the question while you still have time to live the answer. While choices are still open. While words can still be spoken, and moments can still be shared. Because one day, the question will answer itself. And when that day comes, the only thing that will matter is whether you listen when it first asked you to pay attention. So you don't have to learn this too late. I'm not sharing this because I believe my life is a warning. I share it because it is ordinary. And that is exactly what makes it worth listening to. Most lives don't collapse in a single moment, they slowly drift in directions we never intended. Nothing in my life went terribly wrong. That's the truth. And yet, there are things I would do differently, not because I failed, but because I waited. I waited for the right time, the right feeling, the right version of myself. If there is one thing age teaches you, it is that waiting is rarely neutral. What we delay, we quietly choose not to live. And those choices add up, not loudly, but steadily. I don't wish you a perfect life. I wish you an intentional one. A life where you say what matters sooner, show up more fully, and stop assuming that time will always make room for what you postpone. You don't need to live faster. You need to live awake. To recognize when a moment is asking for your attention, and to give it freely, without bargaining with the future. Because one day, reflection will replace possibility. Looking back will be easier than looking forward. And when that happens, the question will no longer be what you could change, but whether you were present while you still could be. If these words reach you in time, let them be a quiet reminder. Not to fear the end, but to respect the middle, the part of life you are living right now. So you don't have to learn this too late. Live as if your attention matters, because it does. And in the end, that may be the truest form of living we ever get.